Every time I talk about the Imago Way, I say it slightly differently. I start with a different facet of this beautiful gem. But let me speak to the part that I think would be most important. So I often start off by talking about the co-creation. Co-creation is at the heart of the Imago Way. And the co-creation begins with the relationship. And the relationship is the sacred space. Okay? And what we try to do in the Imago Way is to recognize with great respect and empathy how you honor the other, to the point where you recognize that there really isn't an other, that we are as one in this. Wow. That's the first part. The second part of the Imago Way is that, okay, the people who are closest to the experience, the struggle, the pain, the challenge, the opportunity of it, are the ones with the knowledge. They may not have all the resources, but they know what it is that they need. So how do we invite a trust-based conversation so that we in that relationship can do that co-creation? And then, okay, then let's figure out where in the system there are these pinch points, these tensions. Let's see if we can untangle some of those tensions, turn down the heat on stress and conflict, so that we can begin to find pathways iteratively to create a different story. And in creating that different story, let's begin to look for small evidence that grows and grows and then ripples out until we're beginning to see something that goes to scale. And then once it goes to scale, then how did we do that? Let's go back and look at what we did. And let's see how we can replicate that. And let's make sure we keep these accountability structures in place, because that keeps it and that sustains it. And then that's the question. How do we sustain this? And so that people know that we can do this, build confidence around that, and go forward. Now, that's sort of like the process of the Imago Way. But the other part of the Imago Way is the invitation to conversation about the most important things that we're about. That what I am about, what we are about, collectively and individually, there's this ongoing reciprocal mutuality that is built into that. And this mutuality often speaks to the challenges, the shadow, the darkness that we have as human beings, and also those that we encounter in a larger context, and then how to not get so overwhelmed by that, that in our circles of influence, that we can begin to do the parts that we can. And to trust from that space of action, that we can then stimulate, invite, innervate other people to do the same thing. And that's core. And then the last part, just most difficult and continuous, is for us to live into that ourselves as Imago, to constantly challenge ourselves to say, are we living into this way? And can we then convey to others what this is about? And bit by bit, piece by piece, we are now able to do that. And that's the essence of the Imago Way. But then there are other parts that are Imago, and that's the key. The whole notion of an Imago, the image, to bring something forward, and the whole metaphor of the caterpillar that is, moving to that space before it really takes flight. That whole process is the beautiful imagery and metaphor, but the metaphor speaks to other pieces. It's the notion that how do we deal with in development that if you cut the cocoon of a butterfly, it never develops its wings. It needs that struggle to be able to do that. So how do you accompany as opposed to step in and think you're doing something helpful, but may actually be doing something that deprives the opportunity to really take flight yourself. So that's another piece of it. But another real important part, and this is the part that I think I want to emphasize, is that we use a psychodynamic archetypal understanding of organizations, and we take a systemic understanding where we're looking at the interrelationship or the integral nature of what is going on here in a small organization and how it fits into a larger global context. Now, what is difficult is that there are issues of power, there are issues of history and colonial legacy. There are issues of race and gender and orientation. All of these things are in this, and they're economic caste-like elements that are part of this that are in these conversations. We try to have those conversations. What we found is that we were able to create situations of trust in us in those conversations. And by having the trust, then you can talk about what's going on in your family, what's going on in your village, what's going on in your relationship with your brother or sister in the organization, because those are the things that tend to be hidden. And behind that veil is often the thing that is intruding on the capacity to be able to even think about scaling up. We were able to invite people to tell those stories and to literally show us by using models, actually little Lego toys, to be able to actually see and to talk about those things that were undiscussable. We even, before it was possible to do this on the internet, we used to bring clickers into meetings with Sewa. And then the women would be able to see on the screen right in front of them by voting with these little clickers where the tensions were in their own organizations. And then we could have a conversation. And from there, then we could create the structures. And then we could create the systems. And then we could help people develop what you would call a strategic plan. But we would also work towards creating accountability structures. And then our job was to accompany these processes, not to be the ones to do them, but to accompany these processes so the capacity would be developed with our partners. And that's those are things that set us apart. What was incredibly powerful, and I don't think we ever even thought about whether we should do it, is that soon as the pandemic hit, we understood that the people with whom we work were going to be disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And as it turned out, that was the case. And we also knew that from a relatively privileged position, that we had an opportunity to, if nothing else, create the space for people to come together collectively, to speak to what this has been like, to offer what we were learning about resilience in the pandemic to others. But more importantly, as it turned out, in at least 2 of our engagements, to cry and grieve together from the losses, and to be able to just speak to the pain and to be held as much as you can be held through a screen like this. And to trust that we were actually there. And it's difficult for me right now because I'm remembering one of those workshops and the number of people who lost husband, brother, sister, mother, who themselves were devastatingly affected by the pandemic. The flood of that was just anyway. So I think our job was just to be there. And what I didn't imagine was how important it was simply to listen, to be a witness to the realities. And so resilience isn't simply about bouncing back. I mean, what we talk about in terms of resilience is to create the conditions so that when things like this happen in the future, that we know that we're going to be able to bounce back, that we have ways of responding, that we can recognize that we are not alone in this, and that we can activate our human ecosystems so that we can support each other and grow into whatever that next moment will be. So for us, resilience is sort of understanding that while we don't want these moments, any of us, these are moments that also offer opportunities for learning. So as we are grieving, as we are facing loss, as we are in the devastation of it, let's pay attention also. And so that when we arise from this moment, what might we be able to do? And how might we be able to do it differently? And how might we continue to be present to each other so that we are able to live into who we might yet become together.